I'm kind of bad with names already, so if I had to memorize 1,000 of them, that would be stressful. Thankfully, this book does not make you do that. Hello, welcome to my channel. This is the Ponderings of Pete, and I am Pete. Thank you so much for coming. If this is your first time here, thank you. I hope you stick around. I hope you use the subscribe button down below. Comment, engage. I really enjoy, reading everybody's comments and replying and talking to people. I mean, that's kind of why I made the channel, because I just like talking about books. And if you are coming back for another time, whether it be the second, the third, the fourth, the 347th, which would be kind of weird because I don't have 347 videos, but thank you anyways. Welcome back. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. Please comment below. Tell me what you think. Have you read this book? I mean, everybody, really. Comment below. And if you read this book, if you haven't read this book, if this seems interesting, let me know. Today's review will be non-spoiler because it's the first book in a series, and it's honestly easiest to talk about it in non-spoiler terms. So this will be fully non-spoiler. So, shall we get into it? First up, the book is called The Thousand Names by Django Wexler. This is a Flintlock fantasy book, and it follows primarily two main POVs with a few other POVs scattered throughout, but nothing super consistent. These two main POVs are Marcus Devor. I don't know how to pronounce his name. This man is a captain in the army of a vaguely imperialistic army from a name of a country that I actually cannot remember because thank you, fantasy. The other main character is our girl Winter, who is also a soldier in this army, but of course this is an army that doesn't typically allow women, so she is a woman in hiding. From what? Well, just read the book. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was fantastic for a lot of different reasons. I think there were some very memorable characters in this book, and I'm really looking forward to continuing on with the series. To a certain extent, this book felt kind of historically based outside of the fact that the names were all changed and they were super unfamiliar. I feel like that it didn't necessarily bother me a lot, but the lack of magic for about the first half of the book, or half to 2/3 of the book, really took some people out of it during this read-along, because this was a read-along on Library of Alexandria's Discord. So we're currently reading through this series. For me personally, I didn't mind the lack of magic. Sometimes the magic can overshadow a lot of other, things with the world, and some authors have a tendency to overly focus on the magic when it's not needed. This book definitely didn't do that. Magic is very much treated as something that is rarely used, barely used, and not something to be relied upon. We will see if that changes in the next few books, which I have a suspicion that it will be used more based on some of the titles, and then as well as the summary from the back of the second book, which is Shadowthrow. I think that especially the lack of magic in the first book is a reason why people tend to go to Powder Mage, at least so far, that I can tell, as like their main go-to Flintlock fantasy. Powder Mage is very heavy magic, we're going to kind of go a little bit anime with this magic. So it's definitely more fantastical than this book, whereas this Flintlock fantasy would appeal to some people that are more involved with military fiction, historical military fiction, to be precise. The tactics and the strategy used in this book felt very believable and were executed very well, such that the battles made sense. They were very descriptive, so you definitely know where on the battlefield your characters are and what is happening around them. And I really appreciate that, especially just making it so vivid. It's, not something I've been super exposed to in, some of the fantasy that I've read. And I'm finding that I quite enjoy it, knowing the tactics and just kind of seeing it all happen and unfold. I have a little bit of an admiration for it and for the author for being able to portray it such that. Speaking of tactics and armies on the battlefield, our characters are kind of on the side of the Imperialists, which is interesting because you're rooting for your characters, but you may not necessarily be rooting for the army that they're with. These specific imperialists are working to dethrone a rebellion or overthrow a rebellion that recently happened. They're doing it on behalf of a very, I would just call him a spoiled brat of a ruler. It's not something where there's a huge, clear, good and bad side other than, hi, I'm rooting for these characters and thus I'm kind of rooting for their side. The rebels are definitely not portrayed as wholly good either. They are honestly, to a certain extent, stereotypical, overbearing religious types. And personally, sometimes the religious zealot rebellion is overdone in the worst way, to the point that it seems really unbelievable. I think, one, we didn't spend enough time with the rebellion in order for them to get unbearable, but they definitely could have gone into that stereotype a lot harder if we had spent more time with them. I'm glad we didn't. But at the same time, they weren't portrayed as a monolith, which I appreciated. If you have a religious rebellion, you're not going to have everybody siding with the rebellion because of religion. You're going to have some people that latch on to the rebellion because of their own need for power, their own want for power. And that is actually shown, which is really, really nice, because rebellions aren't a monolith. People join them for different reasons. I'm going to talk about 3 characters that play a major role in this book. The first we have up is Winter, our girl in hiding in the military. This was done pretty well. There were a few moments where I was like, I feel like they would have found out through some similar situation or this situation, but okay. I think the tactical point of view that she provides as a sergeant in the army was very valuable. I really enjoyed it. Especially, I really like the contrast sometimes between a frontline sergeant and then the top of the line giving orders captain, because it just provides a nice balance of craziness. Because sometimes you will have the cool, calm, tactical commander, but you don't see the chaos of the front lines. And that's really what it is war. Battles are complete chaos when you're down in the trenches. So seeing that acknowledged, I guess, is, a sign of good writing, in my opinion, and not idealizing war, because idealizing war is not good. And I also enjoyed the fact that Winter was competent at her job and she was a natural leader. I think that was portrayed really well, and it was enjoyable to read. And I am looking forward to Winter doing more things as the series goes on. The next one I want to talk about is Janus, our tactical genius, who is very well written. Sometimes you can have an issue with writing geniuses, because the writer can easily make them invincible, because they're so smart and can predict every single thing. And then, for plot reasons, they may have to make them fail. And so you make them fail for plot reasons, and then it doesn't make sense, and people get a bad taste in their mouth, because they had a blind spot in their thinking. And while that may be slightly realistic, it doesn't make sense within a story. But in this case, I think he was just well written for the events that happened in this book. I really won't tell you if he succeeds or fails at things, because that would be a spoiler, but he does succeed a lot at the very least. He's a tactical genius, so he has to succeed, because otherwise he wouldn't be a tactical genius. I really like this character. I had some moments with him where I was like, what you doing? Because he does play his cards very, very close to the chest. And that in itself is interesting, because you're not seeing inside the mind of a tactical genius. And if there's one thing that's harder than actually writing a believable tactical genius, or any type of genius, is writing what's going on in their mind. Because it's just, nobody knows what goes on in the mind of genius except a genius. And every genius is kind of different and crazy to their own degree. So breaking that veil can be very hard. There is also an element to writing a genius, I think, that involves mystery. You have to have an element of mystery in showing that they're smarter than the reader a vast portion of the time. Because if you reveal their thought process, sometimes they think really obvious things, or things that are really obvious to them in hindsight. And if you show them things and show them drawing conclusion from very obvious things, they're not going to come across as a good tactical, a great, well-written genius. So there's a certain extent, like, you have to try to write them smarter than your average reader. I think that Wexler did a very good balance in writing Janus. And it's very educational to see how he wrote Janus. The last one I'm going to talk about is our other POV character, which is Marcus, who Marcus didn't necessarily fall flat for me. I would say he was probably the least interesting. He was interesting because Janus was around him. He really felt like a typical upper echelon, sympathetic and moral commander, right? He felt like somebody I've read before. There's a few people I could probably compare him to that come to mind. And he had a certain naivete to him that I wasn't sure if it made sense, but it was there because he needed to be that way for plot reasons. I was okay with Marcus. I wasn't a huge fan of him, but the things that happened within his point of view chapters were definitely interesting because of all the people swirling around Marcus. So he's definitely necessary. Definitely not disappointed with this book. I love this book. There were some amazing battle scenes. That's honestly the biggest takeaway for me, was like, it's an interesting world. Some very good setup for the rest of the series with how the magic is and how this imperialist army is and where they're going next. So I loved the genius, of course, and everything that went along with him. So definitely check this out if you're looking to get into something like Flintlock fantasy, or if you're into like more military fiction or military fantasy. This is also definitely a great book to pick up. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure to get some rest because that's super important. Bye.